Hey everyone, today I'm going to show you 10 endgame principles every chess player should know in order to get better at chess and play the endgames correctly. Guys, before we start today's video, if you want to watch other videos like this, and if you enjoy the video, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe. I don't have the cool infographics because I don't have the subscribers yet, but I bet a lot of you are in subs, so make sure you do that. Thank you. So the endgame is the last part of the chess game. Obviously, the game is composed by the opening, the middle game, and the endgame. The endgame is where there are few pieces and the game is basically being decided. So it's basically where you sell off the game and the result, whether you win or draw or lose. So let's start by looking at some basic checkmates. Now, the first basic checkmate we're going to look at is rook and king versus king. So white is completely winning. There's very few resistance black can do with just a king, and so but we need to know the way we should proceed. So the way we win this is we progressively cut off the king to further back and further back, and eventually it's going to be on the last rank, and we're going to get a position where we checkmate the opponent because they cannot move backwards because there are no more files. So we go rook a5 check in this position. This applies for all positions, not only this one. King d6, and we go king e4. So this is the first thing we should basically take a look at. Basically, we want to have the opponent play the king to the opposite square to our king, so that we can check and keep pushing him backwards. Because you can see the king cannot come forward because our king just cuts it off. And so if we go king d4 straight away, trying to, on the next move, make this check, black can just move the king, and actually if we check, they can come to f5 in this position. And you see the king is getting away. We're not getting the king to where we wanted it to go, to be cut off. So this is not the way to proceed. We should go king e4, wait for them to make the opposition. They should go king c6, a little bit of a resilient try. We switch the rook across because they were gonna threaten to take it. King d6, rook g5, king c6, and now we keep going like this. If they decide to come back, we can check and force them further back. They should just keep going, but eventually they're going to run out of board, so they have to go back and we check. King c7, king b5, again the same strategy. We wait for them to make the opposition. We switch the rook across again, and here we don't go for the opposition because they can break it, so we wait again. King d7, we check, eventually they're forced to the back rank, and here, watch the magic happen, how we checkmate. We do the same strategy. It's easy to memorize in this sense because we always do the same thing over and over, and eventually the opponent runs out of squares, and this is no longer just cutting the king off, it is a checkmate. So with the queen it's very similar. We have the added advantage that the queen can also control the diagonals. So for example, this is a check, and we just get the king off the same way, but again the queen helps more, it's easier. After king h7, we're going to go king f5, king h8, king f6. It's very important not to, well, this is sort of a position you have to take into your brain. We cannot keep cutting the king off because this would be a stalemate. So stalemate is when the king has no legal moves and it's not in check. And what this means is the game is a draw, not a win, because the opponent cannot move. So we have to avoid this. We have to give the king a square, and then we check. Now moving on to a little bit of a more complex concept. This is called the box. If you've seen any chess videos about endgames, you've probably seen this concept all around the places. Basically, when there's a passed pawn and we're trying to catch it, we're trying to figure out if we can catch it or not. Instead of calculating move by move, pawn push, king goes, pawn push, king goes, pawn push, king goes, because that can lead to very messy calculations and it's not practical at all. A simple way to do so is to imagine a box that reaches out to, so from where the pawn is, we create a diagonal to the last rank, the 8th rank, and so we create a box with that diagonal, and we see if the king is inside it. So if this king is anywhere inside this box, the position is a draw because the king can catch the pawn. If the king is outside, then the pawn can promote if the king is the only piece that can stop it. So in this position, black to move draws, king d7, you come inside the box. But if it's white to move, and he goes a5, he wins, because he creates this box, and the king cannot catch it in time. So this is a very nice mnemonic to have in mind. It really helps out in cutting off our time of calculation during the games. The next concept we're going to talk about is the opposition. This is, again, a more advanced concept. So we want to have the opposition on our enemy's king, in king endings, I should say. So what does this mean? This means that if it's black to move here, he wants to go king e5. So the king physically stops the enemy's king from coming forward. And this is extremely important in king endings. You see, any other move here, as black would lose, but king e5 is the only one that holds. Opposition is when the kings are separated by an odd number of squares. So in this case, they're separated by 3 squares, by 1. There are 3 squares connecting them. So that means this is an opposition. This draws because the king cannot come forward, and so we keep making the opposition. And once they push their pawn, we can just move our king to the side. And we always try to make this opposition. We never let their king forward. So the pawn must, we always want to provoke the pawn either next to the king or more advanced than the king. And you see, eventually, this will reach a stalemate, because here either white goes king e6 and it's a draw by stalemate. Again, black has no legal moves. Or white has to drop guard of the pawn, and we can just take the pawn. Now, this is an example of the same position, but here it's white to move, and white wins by going king e4, making that position. Now, this wins because, again, the king can come forward. This king cannot hold on its own a barrier against our king. So we come forward, and we keep coming forward, and eventually we can push the pawn. And here, again, important not to go e6. This would be a draw after king f8. But king e6, we make the opposition again, and we win, because once their king stops making a barrier, holding a barrier against our king, the pawn is actually free to march forward. Next concept is that one pawn makes the whole difference. So white is completely winning just because he is one pawn down. So never give up pawns if you don't need to, and they can prove to be extremely valuable, especially during the ending. Here white is completely winning. The reason is that he can basically just make a pass pawn. So if you make a bunch of random moves, doesn't matter what I'm doing. Basically, the idea is, eventually, if we trade down all the pawns, so we trade down the pawns, eventually we get a position where we are just a pawn up on one side of the board. And this pawn most likely will become a queen. Here, it doesn't matter about the opposition, because the enemy still has moves, which means that if they come back, this is no longer a stalemate, because they have moves. So we can play around this, and this is just a win. Next concept, keep your pawns connected. So it's white to move here. Should he trade or should he not trade? The answer is he shouldn't trade, because these pawns are isolated, which means they're weak. We can attack them, and our opponent will have to defend them, most likely. So after rook b3, for example, we're attacking this pawn. And this is a much better move than trading, which would help fix the structure. So fixing the structure means basically when it's a bad structure, when the pawns are isolated or doubled, and we are helping our opponent's structure. Here the pawns are connected, and this is already a draw. If you go rook b3, we have good chances to win this game. Next tip, activate your king. So it's white to move. There's only one move that wins in this position, and that's king e2. That's king e2. So it's just as all a matter of tempos. Tempos means, moves. And often these king endings can be extremely hard to calculate, even though the position is so simplified. And so we have to rely on, usually we have to rely on rules we can guide ourselves by, instead of rawly calculating everything. So here king e2 wins, because our king is first to the queen side, and black's king would need an extra move to defend this pawn. And since it doesn't have that extra move, we just can win a pawn and promote the other. Or, you know, if the king went back here, we could go around the king and take these pawns. However, if we waste a move here, let's say h4, now it's a draw, because the king is actually in time. Again, it's all a matter of tempos. Here the king is actually in time to protect the pawn, and this is already just a draw. Tip number 9, prioritize passed pawns. So passed pawns are extremely valuable, much more valuable than other pawns, because they can threaten to become a queen, and our opponent usually has to stop that. So in this position, black is threatening to take this pawn. Should we defend it, or should we play a5? Well, the correct answer is we should play a5. If rook h1, we never want to fall passive in these endings. We always want to activate, you know, our king and other pieces as well, as we saw on the last tip. Here after rook h1, rook h4, for example, is already a very active move, and this is a draw. So we need to go a5. That's the only move that wins here. And after a trade, they can even take with check. But the basic point is that this pawn will just win us the game, because it's already so far advanced that it's unstoppable. Its promotion is unstoppable. Tip number 10, stop passed pawns from advancing. So what do I mean by this? Well, we already saw that passed pawns are extremely dangerous, and they become more valuable as they creep closer towards becoming a queen. So here's black to move, and black should play rook a5 to physically stop the pawn from promoting. So it cannot get any more dangerous because the pawn cannot promote, cannot come forward. The rook also cannot leave because it's tied down to this pawn. So in this ending, this is actually a draw, because black can actually create enough counterplay here with his pawns, and white is not in time to make a significant threat out of this pawn. And eventually, we can sacrifice our rook for the pawn at the right moment, and this is a draw, because this rook will have to sacrifice itself for this pawn in order for the pawn not to become a queen. Tip number 10, cut the opponent's king off. So we know that we should activate our king, and our king is pretty active in this position. So we should think about our opponent and what he wants to do. He probably wants to activate his king as well. And so we should prevent him from doing that by cutting the king off. And what this means is now we just have to worry about advancing this pawn, because this king cannot get active, so it's really not taking part in the game that much. And we can simply advance the pawns, and it's actually unstoppable that it becomes a queen, because our opponent doesn't have enough pieces to prevent that. Our final tip, tip number 11, is that activity is more important than material. I left this one for last because it is more complex than the others, significantly more complex. So earlier I told you that we need to hang on to our pawns, and so after this check, king g3 check, king f4, if the rook attacks the pawn again, what should we do? Well, this is an exception to the rule by creating another rule, which is activity is more important than material. So here, if we just hang on to the pawn, this is just a draw by repetition. And also rook h1 is not a good move, because our opponent can just go rook h3 and start counterplay again. So it's better to give up this pawn and be active than hold on to the pawn and be passive. So we should go king e5 here. And after rook takes, king d6, and we keep coming with the king. And you can see already the material is restored, but our king will take these pawns, inevitably. Our opponent doesn't have enough counterplay, and not in time at least. So we often want to give away material in order to get more active. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'll see you guys soon with another video. Peace out.